I'd like to start with just a couple practical suggestions in terms of getting the most out of the retreat. I like to distinguish formal practice from what I call practice in life. By formal practice, I mean a situation where you're attempting to maintain a continuity of technique of some sort. It could be done in stillness, seated, standing, lying down, or it could be done in motion, simple motion or more complex motions, exercise kind of motions, even doing tasks, those kinds of things. But what characterizes formal practice is that it's all about maintaining whatever that technique is. If it's a technique that involves noting, then you're continually noting unbroken. By way of contrast, in daily life, often it's not feasible to do that. We have to take care of business. We have to allocate time, our time and energy to think about stuff and to deal with situations. So we typically in daily life can't have most of our energy focused on maintaining a continuity of technique intentionally. Of course, as you know, I define mindful awareness practices as practices that significantly elevate your base level of mindfulness. And I define base level of mindfulness to mean how mindful a person is under ordinary circumstances when they're not particularly trying to be mindful. So as the result of practice, your base level of mindfulness should be elevated. And even when you're just sort of bopping around taking care of business, thinking about this, talking about that, over the months, years, decades of practice, you should notice that just on autopilot, you're much more mindful, even though you aren't necessarily intentionally trying to implement a technique. So for daily life, what I encourage is something that I call, quote, practice in life, which means that when it's feasible, 30 seconds here, 3 minutes there, you implement a formal technique. When it's feasible means, well, you get a little, hiatus. Like maybe you're an office worker, you have to sit there, you have to think, plan, have meetings, etc. But then you walk to the washroom, or you're in a meeting where your full attention is not really required. And it's like, okay, I'm going to do a few minutes of practice here, I'm going to do a few minutes of practice there. And so you pepper the day with little micro hits. I usually encourage people to have at least a half dozen, as I say, in daily life, under ordinary circumstances, at least a half dozen little hits like that during the day where it's feasible, you're in a simple situation, you're waiting or what have you. Okay, now I'm going to do a technique. And then just go back to taking care of business. Now, if you make a Herculean resolve to really implement a technique for those 30 seconds or for those 3 minutes, you can actually meditate retroactively. I know that seems oxymoronic, meaning contradiction by nature. Okay, oxymoron is something that is contradictory by nature. Mindfulness is in the moment. How can you possibly have retroactive mindfulness? Well, here's what I mean by retroactive mindfulness. As you're just bopping around taking care of business, not particularly implementing any intentional technique, you're stirring up the samskaras. Now, if you then stop on a dime and implement a practice, you can replace quantity with quality. It takes a huge resolve to do that, though. You have to really decide you're going to do that. And then all those juices that got stimulated, that got stirred up, as you were just being ordinary and not even remembering that you're a meditator necessarily, you can process all of that in 30 seconds or in 3 minutes if you really decide you're going to bring all you got to those few minutes of peppering the day. So you sort of if you fully process the juices that got stirred up by ordinary life, then in a sense you meditated retroactively, because you sort of you've cleaned up or broken up forces that got stirred up as you were just going about life. So practice, there's formal practice, continuity of technique, and then there's practice in life. And I divide formal practice into stillness and then in motion. So success on this path is likely to happen if you alternate day-to-day practice with retreats. So here we are at a retreat. In day-to-day practice, there's a little bit of formal practice that you do. Some people do an hour, some people do a half hour, some people do less. There's a little bit of formal practice, and then it's mostly, okay, just going about life, and hopefully you'll remember to pepper it with life, with some practice during the day. So on a retreat, it's a figured round reversal. Basically, what you should aim for is from the instant you wake up in the morning to the instant you lose consciousness at night, for the great majority of that time, you are doing formal practice. Either you're sitting or you're moving, and the moving could be walking, it could be stretching, it could be taking a shower, it could be eating your meal. But you try to maintain a continuity of practice. The one exception to that, which would be more like a practice in life situation, is what we're doing right now. It's fine with me if you are entering formless samadhi as I'm talking and maintaining a formal practice and not listening to me in terms of content. That's fine. But you may want to listen to some of this content also, in which case it's a little bit of going back and forth. Or maybe, you're mostly just listening to listen, and it's just like ordinary things. So interviews, group process, that kind of stuff, that's a practice in life situation where you go in and out of technique as you wish. But other than those times, all the other times, chanting, waiting for me to get here, what have you, putting your clothes on, taking a shower, try, if you can, to have a well-defined technique going. What technique? Doesn't matter. Whatever appeals to you under different circumstances. There's sort of like two kinds of people on this planet. There's the way most people are, and then there are people that think about their day in terms of opportunities to cultivate and apply their mindfulness skills. And it's just a whole different way to approach life. Many of you have probably read the Don Juan books, the Carlos Castaneda books, Teachings of Don Juan and so forth. And if you haven't, there are these great classic, it was written by an anthropologist from UCLA who started to study a Yaqui Indian who lived in Arizona and in Mexico as an ethnographic study. And eventually, even though he was a scientist and a modern anthropologist, he actually got pulled into the cultural view of that India, and stopped being an anthropologist and became a shaman, and wrote about it. But anyway, the native teacher that he calls Don Juan, that's not the guy's real name, but that person was not just a medicine person. That was not just a power healer kind of person. It's absolutely evident, abundantly evident when you read that material, that Don Juan knows about impermanence, no self, and emptiness. He has the liberated consciousness, which can result from those traditional practices in some cases. So, reason I'm mentioning this is there's a lot of incredible sound bites in those writings. One of the things that Don Juan told Carlos was the ordinary person thinks about their life, everything in life, in terms of what was the exact phrase that was used? In terms of fortune and misfortune. But the person who sees thinks about everything that happens in life as an opportunity, a challenge to apply and develop a certain state of consciousness. So becoming that kind of person that sort of thinks of life that way. You can still acknowledge fortune and misfortune, but the day is more or less about cultivation. So that's really desirable. It's really desirable to become that kind of person. One of the Zen masters said that the average person is used 24 hours a day, but the person of Zen uses 24 hours a day. So on retreats, it's good if, other than the few times that we're sort of talking and interacting and that kind of thing, other than that, I would strongly encourage you to attempt unbroken formal practice. So basically, the whole day is just one practice, period. I did a 2-month retreat many years ago with U Pandita, who was Mahasi Sayadaw's sort of heir apparent. And this is a traditional Mahasi retreat. Some of you have done those kinds of retreats. You know, everything, and I mean everything, is done in slow motion. And there's almost a little bit of one-upmanship. Who could be the last person to get to the dining hall? Now, mind you, the dining hall is only about 30 yards from the meditation hall. And there were people that, you know, it was 45 minutes by the time I got there. And this is everything, okay? So it's a 2-month retreat, so, you know, occasionally you have to do laundry or whatever, and it's like, so you're doing your laundry in slow-mo, and it's like 2 hours to do your laundry. And by the way, that's just 3 pairs of underpants. You know? And so it's absolutely continuous practice. Sit, walk, sit, walk, sit, walk, walk, sit, walk, sit, eat, sit, walk, like that. And that's all you do all day. They suggest that you sleep for 4 hours, so that leaves 20 hours of noting practice to do every single day for 2 months. It's incredible. So just try to, as I say, try to keep things going and be that person that sort of strategizes. Okay, chanting. how am I going to focus? You'll have a clear-cut strategy. It could be a lot of things. Maybe it's a focus out. You're going to listen to the sound. You're going to merge with the sound. Or maybe you're going to merge with the physicality of the breathing of the chanting. Or maybe it's a nurture positive. After all, that's what chanting originally was. The mantras and so forth. You did visualization. You had the mantra going. Or maybe it's like a flow. Or your grok on how the chanting induces restful states. Basically, a lot of our agitation is mental talk. Either an internal or an external chanting kind of thing. The mental talk tends to go in all different directions. But if you set up a kind of rhythm in talk space where you're going Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum over and over again. So what that rhythm does is it's like a comb. If your mind is like hair that wants to be a bad hair day and go in all directions, but you're constantly combing through it these tines of Om Mani Padme Hum, these syllables, right? They make it difficult for the mind hair to fly in all different directions. Tends to induce a hear-rest experience relatively. Even when your mind is wandering during chanting, you'll notice it can't wander as fast or as big. So you can like go into see rest, hear rest, feel rest, or you can go into flow states. There's a lot of possibilities. Those of you that are familiar with the range of techniques, and you sort of decide on how you want to do it. This morning for myself, for example, I was doing expansion contraction. Oh, it was so cool. It was in all three modalities, inner and outer. It's just the whole thing was just like simultaneously expanding, contracting. It's just sort of opened. That was like a, interest, opportunity, necessity, right? So it's like, okay, I think I'm going to go with this plan this morning. And like, okay, that's the strategy. At other times, you might want to do other things. So how am I going to practice when I'm taking a shower or when I'm doing my meal? Well, fortunately, you get lots of chance to even get guidance specifically on that. So that attitude of, okay, it's like, keep the continuity. I would strongly encourage that. One of the metaphors that the Buddha used for success with practice is he compared it to getting fire by rubbing sticks together, actually. He said in other words, it's an emphasis on continuity. So if you rub and then you like stop and then you rub and then you stop, well, it's not going to develop something that catches fire. So retreat is a situation where you can sort of catch fire with things by keeping a continuity of practice going. So that's something that I think would be good to consider and think about and try to achieve.